Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. Welcome to the European Parliament, to all of you. I know some visitors groups are here, and welcome, particularly if you haven't been to the Parliament before. My name is Jill Evans. I'm a member of the European Parliament from Wales, from Plaid Cymru, which means the Party of Wales. And I'm a member of the European Free Alliance as well in the Parliament. We have 7 members, and together with Julia and the Pirate Party and some others, we sit in a group with the Greens called the Greens IFA group. I'm also a member of the Culture and Education Committee, and I'm very pleased to be co-hosting this event with Julia Reda, my colleague. Julia has been doing fantastic work, of course, on this issue for the whole group and for the whole Parliament, in fact. And I'm sure that we'll have a very lively and productive discussion today, because this is such an interesting topic. Although geo-blocking is not a familiar word for a lot of people yet, I think it soon will be, because it's something that affects us all. And it is, of course, put very simply, the restriction of internet content based on geographical location. So, for example, if you try and access a video on YouTube, users are checked against an allowed or denied list, and then it's decided whether or not you can actually get access to that. The iPlayer on the BBC, for instance, is available in the UK, but only when you are accessing it from the UK. And licensing and copyright limitations are the main reasons for geo-blocking, as well as to respect differences in some laws which are cross-boundary. It affects online shopping as well, forcing customers to buy from different versions of the same company's websites in different countries, and so that has an effect on prices. I'm sure we've all seen that sentence come up: this content is not available in your country, something that's very annoying to consumers, but particularly a problem for people who depend on cross-border access, whether it's because they're exchange students or migrants, people who commute to work across borders. But it also has a particular impact on linguistic minorities. And I mentioned the European Free Alliance earlier. We work with unrepresented peoples and stateless nations and linguistic minorities. And of course, there are opportunities for minority languages in terms of our new connected world. But we want to make sure that they are not a threat to minority languages as well. Now, there are many situations that arise. I'm sure we'll hear about a lot of them which are affected by geo-blocking. And yesterday, I'm sure you'll know, the Commission published a communication on copyright and a directive on portability. As part of this digital single market strategy, the Commission's proposal will allow people who already have services like Netflix, who have signed up to those and paid for those in their own country, to use those services abroad. And there are already outlines of future plans to tackle geo-blocking to enable broadcasters to make their content more widely accessible. And there are things in these proposals that we do welcome, because it is time to update the rules on copyright and digital content. But the plans only address some aspects and some concerns on this issue. It isn't broad enough. It doesn't tackle the issue of accessing services which are not offered in the country of residence and in people's own languages. And as I mentioned, this is particularly a problem for linguistic minorities. Now, the Parliament's been quite active on this issue. In July, the Parliament adopted a report by Julia Reda, which got a lot of international attention. And the report states that industry geo-blocking practices should not prevent cultural minorities living in EU member states from accessing existing content or services in their language that are free or paid for. And one of the reasons that Julia invited me to work with her on this seminar is because Wales, that I come from, is a bilingual country. Welsh is a minority language spoken by about 20% of people. And we have our own Sianel Pedwar Cymru, the fourth channel, Welsh language channel, which was set up in 1982 after many, many years of hard fought for campaigning, and it is at the moment facing public sector cuts and is struggling, but is a successful channel, and something like this is obviously going to affect it very directly. I've been in discussions with S4C. They unfortunately couldn't send someone today, but they are following this issue very closely, and I hope that we will be able to organise another event with Julia's support, because obviously this is not an issue that's going to go away, and we need to be working very hard on it. Certainly as members of the European Parliament, we will be doing that. So I'm delighted that we've got such a high-profile panel today. I'm going to hand over first to Felice Simonelli from the Centre for European Policy Studies, which is a think tank based in Brussels, and he's going to give us an overview of the situation as it is today. Felice.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. Evans and Mrs. Reda, for inviting me today to this event. I have to say that probably I spent too much time at my desk at CEPS, but it's the first time that I have this positive perspective in terms of cultural diversity when it comes to cross-border access, because I think that this is one of the main reasons why many commenters are against, removing copyright territoriality. They usually read that, if you remove copyright territoriality, you are going to impinge on cultural diversity. So having a different perspective for me is very interesting. So thank you again. Today, I'll try to give you just, an overview, a broad picture of what's going on in Europe, providing some numbers. I'll try to reply to a few questions and probably to ask some other question at the end of my presentation. The first question that I would like to reply is to understand if there is any internal market problem. Nowadays, the online distribution of copyrighted content in Europe is dominated by territorial licensing agreement, which fragment the internal market. There are some exceptions. For instance, when it comes to the publishing industry, copyright territoriality is not an issue. It's fair to say that it's not an issue. It is, of course, an issue in the audiovisual sector. It is also an issue, to some extent, to a large extent, in the music sector. What are the main impacts of these territoriality licensing schemes on the functioning of the internal market? We can single out at least two effects: a limited cross-border portability. So, of course, as mentioned, consumers that lawfully subscribe to online services in a certain member state cannot access to the same content when they travel abroad, temporarily, of course. And another issue that might be even more important in terms of magnitude is the limited cross-border trade. And this has at least two dimensions. The first dimension is that some consumers in EU cannot purchase goods or services that are instead available to other EU consumers. So we do not have a digital single market. This is a straightforward evidence. Another problem is that even when the same good or service is provided in several EU member states, consumers very often can only access to their national offer, so at local conditions and at probably a different price. But who is affected by this problem? So what is the magnitude of the problem? According to a study made for the European Commission by Plum Consulting in 2012, limited cross-border portability affect what the so-called short-term migrants and travelers, so people that just move cross-border. In 2012, there were about 5 million of Europeans per day. I guess that now probably this number is a little bit higher due to larger mobility across country. Another problem is the limited cross-border trade. The same study stressed that this problem can be divided in two sub-problems. First of all, who is affected by the impossibility to access to content provided in other member states. So, of course, long-term migrants, people that move permanently abroad for a while. In 2012, there were some 13 million Europeans, and there was a market for these users that was estimated in the area of 750 million to 1.6 billion per year. In addition, there are people with foreign language skills or interests, or also linguistic minority. They account for some 110 million Europeans. So these are numbers, to some extent, by far larger than the one affected by the portability issue. In addition, there is the problem of being able only to access to your national offer. This problem, in principle, affects all Europeans, because all Europeans in all member states can only have an access to their national offer, not to an offer that's provided in another member state. So the issue is even larger in terms of magnitude. But to some extent, this issue also affects content creators, right holders, and commercial users. Whenever there are foregone opportunities, because, I mean, they cannot trade cross-border. Probably, I mean, I'm not sure that the market fragmentation is the first best solution for all the authors and for the content providers in the EU. But what is so special about copyrighted content? Because in many other markets, we don't have a digital single market. We still have barrier to cross-border trade. One of the main features of the digital single market and of online content is that there is no delivery costs. So if you want to buy something that is tangible from abroad, you still have to pay for shipment costs. If you want to buy copyrighted content, delivery costs are marginal. I have to say that to some extent, service providers have to invest in infrastructure to provide a good quality of service abroad. You need server abroad, so there is some cost, but it's lower than transportation costs for a physical good. As things stand now, copyright is also a tool that facilitates market fragmentation, more than in other settings. Why? First of all, I mean, copyright is territorial. And EU right holders is entitled with 28 different rights, not with one pan-European rights. And due to freedom of business and to the copyright framework, it's possible to ban parallel imports, to prevent parallel imports. So this is a feature that is very peculiar in this setting, and it does not apply, for instance, to copyrighted goods, so to physical media that includes a copyrighted work. In this case, parallel import cannot be prevented because the principle of exhaustions apply. In addition, the current copyright framework constitutes also a kind of cost barrier for market integration. We don't have to forget that the transmission of copyrighted content in the digital networks involve two different rights, the reproduction right and the making available rights. In addition, there are different right holders that have rights on the same piece of work. For instance, this applies to the music sector. So transaction costs can be increased when it comes to licensing agreement by the current copyright framework. Next slide, please. Is copyright the only obstacle, or there are also additional obstacles? It's not fair to say that if we remove the obstacles created by copyright, we are going to have a digital single market for copyrighted content. There are several additional obstacles. I can spot socioeconomic diversity. In Europe, the average income for a family with 2 workers goes from 8,000 euro in Bulgaria to 80,000 euro in Luxembourg. So you have a different purchasing power in different member states. Another barrier probably is due to cultural and linguistic diversity. some content needs to be adapted locally. For instance, you have to dub many movie and TV series when it comes to the audiovisual sector. In addition, some content have limited cross-border demand by definition. There are movies that are very interesting for the Italian public, but might not be appealing abroad. This is, of course, the case for many movies. In addition, I would also mention that there is a need to achieve legal harmonization in many other areas of law, for instance, consumer protection, taxation. And another important issue raised by some commenters is the one of lack of demand for lawful content. But on this point, I mean, I'm a little bit skeptical, because it's a little bit a chicken-egg dilemma. You don't know if lack of demand for lawful content prevent the provision of legal content, or the opposite, the absence of fair offer for legal content increase illegal download. In addition, when it comes to the audiovisual content market, there are additional obstacles that are related to the status quo. For instance, the financing scheme for movies. In many cases, producers of movie requires for upfront payment by national broadcasters in exchange for exclusive territorial exploitation. Another important point in the audiovisual market is the one of the so-called release windows. That is a distribution strategies. So, I mean, players prefer to keep the market fragmented to make the most from this strategy using different release time in different member states. Is a reform of the copyright framework necessary? Here I'm not going to give you all the replies, but I suggest to read the two studies that have been recently published by CEPS. CEPS carried out this study for the European Parliament. They are available both on the European Parliament website and on CEPS website. And I mean, one study was an ex post evaluation of the InfoSoc directive and its related instrument, so of the EU copyright framework. Our evaluation was quite negative. We provided a score from 1 to 5 to 4 different dimensions: the effectiveness, so the ability to achieve the target; the efficiency, the ability to achieve this target at a reasonable cost; the coherence, so the coherence of the copyright framework internally among the pieces of legislation that compose the framework, and externally with other area of legislation; and relevance, so is it still relevant or need to be updated, to be adapted to the online environment. As you can see, the scores are pretty low, are quite low in all the dimensions. In addition, I mean, we also try to do an impact assessment to understand what are the best policy options to achieve a digital single market in the field of copyright. You can read, I mean, our evaluation. What I can summarize here is that, first of all, no action is not a viable option. And in this, CEPS welcome the new proposal and also the bottom portability and the communication on copyright, because something is moving. Probably, I mean, we would have expected it a bit more. We are sure that more Europe is needed in the field of copyright. Then I would close with a couple of questions. First of all, I mean, I'm trying to understand if the Commission is really going direct to the point, or is trying to erode the wall of fragmentation of copyright territoriality with different instruments. And I mean, this might come with a problem, because I mean, when you achieve the same target with a different instrument, probably you are not considering all the possible side effects. Because what is interesting to me is, first of all, the current investigation and statement of objection delivered to Sky UK by DG Comp when it comes to the agreement between movie producers, US movie producers, and European broadcasters. According to the investigation that is ongoing, so I mean, I don't know what will be the conclusion, there might be agreement between movie producers and broadcasters that are affecting the trade between member states, and so are prohibited by EU competition law. DG Comp is focusing on the so-called absolute territoriality exclusivity, which includes both active sale, basically when you try to sell something to a market, making advertising, and passive sale. So basically when someone comes to you to buy your product, even if you don't make any advertising. It's called unsolicited sales, and you still say, I cannot sell it to you. So, you know, if they end up concluding that active sales should be always allowed, probably they are going to erode the copyright territoriality. My question is if this distinction between active sale and passive sales is still a meaningful one in the online environment, where you can access each shop even without advertising. Another question that I have, and I'm sorry if probably, I mean, this might look like a stupid question, but I just read this morning very quickly the legislative proposal on portability, and I have two. I don't get to the full extent the, you know, the reason behind this very specific proposal. And two questions popped up in my mind. The first one is, how long does a temporary presence last? I mean, it's 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 year, 5 years. I mean, it's quite. There will be each provider in the member state decide how long it is a temporary. I'm living in Belgium for 1 year, but I still want to look to watch Italian movies. So probably, I mean, it can be longer than in a couple of weeks. Another problem that I have is, will Sky ask for a certificate of residence when I want to subscribe the service? Or, I mean, it's enough to have a credit card or pay with PayPal, and so, you know, circumvent any kind of definition of what is the country of residence. These are just questions, and I hope that today will be addressed by our panelists. Thank you very much again for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'll introduce the four panelists that we have. Firstly, on my left here, Julia Lindholm, who works at the permanent representation of Finland to the EU on behalf of the government of Åland, which I think has quite a unique status as part of Finland, but Swedish-speaking islands. Secondly, we have Dr. Davyth Hicks, who's Secretary General of the European Language Equality Network, ELEN, which represents 42 language communities in 21 European states, and it works for the promotion and protection of lesser used languages. And on my right, Aleksandra Kluczka, who is the President of AEGEE Europe, European Students Forum. She is a board member of the European Movement International and a youth ambassador of the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And finally, Agustin Reyna is Senior Legal Officer and Digital Team Leader at BEUC, the European Consumers Organisation, which I'm sure you were all very familiar with. So if I can ask Julia to start.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans, and thank you to Julia Reda for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here today. As Mrs. Evans already mentioned, I work at the Finnish Perm Rep here in Brussels, and we are several attachés working on this file, as I can imagine there are in all the permanent representations. But here today I will give the view of the government of Åland. As mentioned, Åland is a unilingual Swedish-speaking region in Finland. It's an archipelago located in the Baltic Sea between Stockholm and Helsinki. There are only about 30,000 in the population, but they have a very broad legislative competence, which means that a lot of the EU legislation, actually a majority of the EU legislation, is implemented independently. There's a very strong constitution guaranteeing the Swedish language of these islands. And the economy is mainly service-based, a lot of financial services and mostly shipping. Since the 60s, the consumers on Åland mainly take part of Swedish linear media content directly from Sweden, and the government of Åland pays license to Sweden for this. And this has worked very well, but since this region is part of the Finnish licensing system, the consumers and also service providers on Åland can take part of the online content. And this is, as already mentioned, due to the absolute territorial license system. So in practice, as soon as it's online, the consumers are geo-blocked. Therefore, when the digital media services gets more advanced, the more excluded these consumers get. And this is, of course, very frustrating because this is a very highly connected region. You can have as fast as 10 GB per second fiber broadband. So there's really no technical barriers. It should be very possible to have all this content. Of course, the government of Åland strongly supports effective protection for creative and intellectual works, but we need to have a system that is not unproportionately discriminating. We very much welcome the Commission's proposal, which is really great for many of the Europeans, especially those who can access the services, the subscription services. But for example, for the population in Åland and for other linguistic minorities, we are not even able to access these services because we are permanently on the wrong side of the border. The Commission mentioned that enhanced confidence to buy cross-border services is needed, and here is a really good example where there's a lot of confidence, but there's no legal possibility to buy these services. And also this is a segment of consumers who are really happy to pay a reasonable price, but not even that is possible. In the Commission's proposal, there's also a system of verified residency that we just heard about. And this would really cement the core problem for these linguistic minorities. So when asking to buy a service today from a neighboring country where you speak the mother tongue of this linguistic minority, consumers are denied due to not legal reasons, but the practical reasons. You lack the social security number of the country or you don't have a permanent address. And as already mentioned, this is where the passive sales system could work very well. When a small group of people or a small group of individuals ask to buy a service in a neighboring member states. And this worked extremely well maybe 10 years ago when it was mostly in a linear environment. You could buy the TV cards. But now when you like to subscribe to a video on demand service, this is not longer possible. So to sum up, portability is a really good solution if you can actually buy this service. But for consumers who are excluded from this market, there's very little help to find here. Instead, they are redirected to a service in a language they don't understand. On Åland, the knowledge of Finnish is very limited. So we are really not asking for unrealistic reforms here. It's more that I see, or we are several minorities who see a need for a long-term and legally sound solution, how to deal with these minorities. And I think we can conclude to say that market-led solutions so far hasn't been very effective. And we very much look forward to the coming Commission proposals in the spring. Maybe we can find something there where licensing system would allow multi-territorial licenses. For example, where you speak the same language in a region. Thank you very much.
My name is Davyth, Hicks, Secretary General of European Language Equality Network. I'd like to thank Julia and Jill very much for inviting us here. Obviously, I think with this issue, it's very important for regional minority languages in Europe. I've got a quick PowerPoint. I'm going to skim through that and then kind of expound on that. Just briefly, to give some kind of background and context, there's about 60 regional minority languages in Europe. That's 55 million people, 10% of the European Union population who speak one of these languages. In continental Europe, it's estimated there's 330 different nationalities with over 100 million, nearly 14% living as a national minority, often with their own language. So it gives you some idea of the context, the numbers of people speaking these languages. Now, at the moment, with Ellen, we represent 44 language groups in 20 states. We comprise most of Europe's civil society language organisations, and this gives us a big mandate, and we work to make that connection between the grassroots organisations and the European international institutions. Our work is divided between advocacy work and project work. That's our two main pillars of our work. Now, I want to quickly really get onto this map, which is on the next slide. And you can see, I think, from the map just instantly that languages are never confined to state borders. And this is the kind of background to the problem with geo-blocking. You can see the North Basque countries in France, the Northern Catalonians in France. You've got the Hungarians living in Hungary, obviously, but also in southern Slovakia, and a massive amount of Hungarian speakers as an indigenous national minority in Romania, based in Transylvania. And all these people are going to be subject to getting blocked, having their language blocked, or the services in their media blocked all the time because of geo-blocking. Then also you have obviously the Swedish Finns in Finland there. You can see they're also having their services blocked. Now if we go on to the next slide, I think there's these kind of broad overarching issues. Obviously, we very much welcome the Commission proposals. They've been needed for a long time. But I think it always comes down to when there is any kind of consideration or any new developments, something that's been lacking at the EU level is that the language dimension must always be considered. It must be firmly embedded into all considerations, especially when you come into less used languages and regional minority languages. If the EU is about respecting linguistic diversity, we want to see some evidence about that in these proposals as this thing develops, just for a start. Now, geo-blocking undermines regional minority language usage, especially for the cross-border minorities. A lack of access for regional language media acts to stigmatise languages, especially for young people, the young speakers of those languages. Under the European Charter for Regional Minority Languages, Article 11, minority language groups are guaranteed access to media in their own language from a neighbouring country. Now, most European states, except for France and Italy, have ratified the Charter. But this obviously is not being implemented. That needs to change. The whole thing about geo-blocking undermines the digital single market because especially from a language point of view, because usually connected cross-border regions, such as, for example, with the Hungarians in Slovakia and Romania again, become digitally disconnected because they can't see any media or they can't buy things on the internet in Hungarian because they're in the neighbouring country. This is ridiculous. It's 2015. So we very much see geo-blocking as equaling language blocking. So very good to see these changes coming about. Now we've got some case studies. Scottish Gaelic TV, spoke to the CEO of them yesterday, just in the context of this conference. He says the BBC rights system is problematic to rebroadcast outside of the UK. Now Gaelic speakers and learners form a global diaspora. If you're outside the UK, you cannot access Gaelic TV. Now it's vital for Gaelic to attract learners globally, but this lack of media undermines this. If we go on to the Welsh television, Espedraech, I spoke to the staff there, the CEO again. He was going, it's our objective to ensure that content is available for a wide audience. There is a need to restrict locations that can watch specific elements of our content, as we are sometimes only able to buy rights to show content within the UK. Now, some types of broadcasting rights are very expensive to purchase internationally, and others are not available to us. Now, again, Welsh is a global language. There's learners that we want to attract, and people speaking Welsh in Patagonia, they are not able to see, to read anything or to get media unless they download it, or you use something like a VPN, which is still, officially illegal. Now, some of our recommendations. With copyright portability, geo-blocking has a huge language dimension for all European languages. That needs to be embedded in any new proposals as things develop. It's vital for us to see impact assessments on regional minority languages at all stages of the process, including this process, apart from other EU developments. We need to see built-in obligations to ensure international transmission for regional language content, especially for cross-border minorities. We need to see built-in obligations for services in all languages of the territory. For example, big corporations like Netflix will arrive in Spain, and even though Catalan, Galician and Basque are co-official languages, Netflix is sitting there going, we're just going to do it all in Spanish. This is, this can't go on. It's 2015 again. You're providing a service. We need to see that kind of thing also enforced. we need to lift the geo-blocking on content with a strong public service flavour. This is another request from the Scottish Gaelic TV. Also, I also spoke to the people in South Tyrol, the Rundfunk Anhalt South Tyrol, who are the broadcasting authority there, and they would like to see the territory that broadcasting rights is based on, instead of being based on state borders, is based on the territory of a language group. You know, it's a new way of thinking about how do we define this. So again, this would help the Swedish Finns as well, about having the services delivered in your language. And then lastly, we have been working with Åland, Isles government and with other regional and autonomous and state governments to develop a memorandum of understanding about how we approach getting rid of geo-blocking in favour of our languages. So just to quickly recap, I think I want to emphasise here is that for us, the language dimension must be embedded in any of this new legislation. We can't carry on like this with this geo-blocking. We need to see our languages used, and having them blocked undermines it, especially for the young people, undermines it from using the language more normally in their everyday lives. So that's just my opening comment, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I would like to say that it's a great pleasure to be here today and to be able to share our views on such an important topic that actually does affect citizens in a very practical way on a daily basis. So it's really a policy agenda topic that actually can be shown to citizens how Europe or lack of Europe affects them. I represent AEGEE Europe, that is the students and youth organization that strives for a united, democratic, borderless Europe that is socially, politically and economically integrated and that values youth participation in its creation and development. And this borderless Europe, it can be understood both as a lack of physical borders between European countries, but it can also refer to lack of borders in mindsets and this transnational perspective of European youth. And I think that in this view, limited access to information and coverage can be seen as one of these borders. And geo-blocking, of course, one of these borders to actually reach this united Europe. Mobility and European environment is something natural for many of the young people that we represent. And looking at the room here, seeing so many young people interested in the topic, I guess it's also something very familiar to you. Many of these people, they work in international teams, they volunteer abroad, they go for short and long-term mobility programs, they do internships abroad, or they just simply travel to see their friends. And often Europe is seen for them as one entity, one home, where access to certain services feels as something natural, something that should be a standard. And this access to information, it should be seen as a part of the European integration process that facilitates lives of people, that enables intercultural learning, intercultural exchange, that enables understanding on what is happening in the social and political aspects in other countries, and it also enables learning. And at the moment, as we all know, as it was mentioned, there are still quite some borders that we face in reality. For instance, I was talking to my friend who is Secretary General of my organization. She lives also here in Brussels as a full-time volunteer, and she was saying with regret how weird and how sad it is that she cannot watch her Dutch TV news online to stay connected with her community and to follow what is happening in her country. And Netherlands is like 1 hour from here. Then I was talking to some other friends who went to a mobility program for Erasmus or for another exchange abroad, and how being there they couldn't access the online library of their university to write their master thesis, which basically was quite a huge obstacle for them to complete their studies, whereas they should be rather appreciated for taking this challenge and having the same rights as students in the country. Also, myself, being from Poland, whenever I come back home, it's quite common that indeed when I check some music on YouTube, I in fact cannot access it, which here in Belgium is quite not a problem at all. if this same Dutch friend would go with me to Poland, and she really loves watching movies on Netflix, she couldn't access that either because we don't have it there. So. So indeed, we do believe that this access to data across borders contributes to cultural exchange. It contributes to learning because indeed, as a student being abroad, you need to have certain access to information. If you can watch foreign media, you can also follow and understand more what is happening in Europe. Than if you just rely on your national media that sometimes present you your very national perspective and national context. It boosts critical thinking, it boosts diversity of perspectives. And we do believe that, that access to various kinds of data across borders should become a standard in the EU and the foundation of the digital single market. We believe that access to this data should be granted especially for materials with educational purposes, including soft skills and non-formal education. And as I mentioned, it is especially crucial for students attending mobility programs. And in general, we believe that this equal access to information beyond borders really will be a step to actually creating this common European public sphere that is so needed to reach this true Europe of citizens, where people can interact with other citizens, when they can have access to the same kind of information, where they can see other perspectives. So we do believe that this structured online public sphere is needed, and that access to data is an important step on reaching this true digital integration. Referring to the proposal of the Commission, we do believe that portability is a step, but it's still a step to reach this true integration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Julia and Mrs. Evans, for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be on a panel that everybody agrees. That's a good indication. Just to start with an interesting story. I remember we were working on this issue of cross-border access already for a while. And I have a chat with a representative of American economic right holders, one of these Hollywood studios, who said that BEUC, by being so stubborn, with easing cross-border access, you're going to kill cultural diversity and language minorities in Europe. So it's quite satisfying to hear that it will be actually the opposite. Now, coming to the topic that invites us today, from a consumer perspective, as we heard, there are basically two types of restriction. Restriction when you have a subscription that you have bought and you cannot access it from abroad. But then you have restrictions also on access, and this is both source of frustration for consumers, and that deserve to be addressed. If we focus first on the portability, which is what we have on the table, we think that it's actually, for portability, again, a very good proposal, and that hopefully it will be adopted quickly by the Parliament and the Member States. The second issue that it was mentioned before is the issue of cross-border access, because portability is great if you have access to the content in the first place. And the problem with the lack of cross-border access has, I would say, two dimensions. On one side is affect competition, does enable people to access something that they want and they're willing to pay for. I think that we said before, consumers want to pay. They have economic power and they're willing to invest for affordable and quality legal offers. Although that is kind of self-evident, but there is even data from the EU Observatory on IPR infringement saying that 80% of youngsters actually prefer quality legal offers instead of downloading from an unauthorized source. So there is potential there. There is willingness to pay. The thing is, on the other side, do we have good offers that actually will attract people? And this is, as I said, very important, for example, Eastern European countries, where their markets are nor perhaps not very interesting enough for certain right holders to share their content, or because they don't find a distributor in that country. So those consumers basically are left without offers. No? And on top of that, they are not allowed even to access content that might be available in another country. After all, it's their decision if they want to access content in a different language, or if they simply want to wait until the market is developed and somebody offers, a distributor offers the content with the local adaptation, subtitling, or even dubbing. We have, for example, to add to the example of Finland, in Slovenia. In Slovenia, our members were telling us that many Slovenian consumers are willing to access German contents, for example. They would like to watch the Bundestag League, and they cannot. And this happens across the EU. People traveling or working temporarily, working abroad, or even living permanently, and they cannot access contents they have available in their country. So we have the freedom to circulate across the EU, but then we're not able to access what we have back home. So it's a kind of an inconsistency. At the same time, this kind of geo-blocking, or this absolute territoriality, also affects the developing of local offers. So, for example, if consumers in certain countries, they don't have another option but to stick to the providers that they have in that country, perhaps there's not much incentive for those providers to develop better offers. And we have a case, for example, in Denmark. Our Danish member carried out a campaign in which 11,000 subscribers, actually they complained because they were not happy with the pay TV subscriptions that they have. You basically buy a package, with few channels, and then you have to always start paying on top if you want to watch premium movies, if you want to watch sports, so you even always paying. So in the first place, consumers should be able to decide from where to buy and under what conditions. And in the case of Denmark, if those consumers that are really fed up with the local offers will have the possibility to get a pay TV subscriber from another country, then the local operators will say, we're losing some market here, so maybe we should give them something better. So it's also very important for developing of competitive offers. So this is more perhaps the topic of the next panel. So what is the next steps now? So we have this portability proposal, which is very good. So now we have to address the problem of geo-blocking, which is also linked, was mentioned before, to the question of passive sales. We do have a single market, but consumers cannot benefit from it, at least when it concerns mainly audiovisual services. We have some case law of the European Court of Justice on the Premier League case, so specifically for satellite, but then we're moving towards more and more online distribution. So what is the situation? So on one side, we have that if a distributor, for example, would allow cross-border access, even in the form of passive sales, then they will have to clear the rights in every country where the content is being accessed. So it's a copyright mess in terms of clearance of rights. So then we do need to accommodate this clearance of rights. There is already, this has been already announced, the revision of the Satellite and Cable Directive, and can help in that regard. But just to summarize, it's something that has to be done step by step. We wait, I don't know how many years, to get some real commitment from the European Commission to do something to reform the copyright framework. Now we have on the table one proposal that addresses a small part of the problem, and there at least there is kind of a commitment to do something else in the future. So I think that we should, if you do it step by step, we can achieve much more than do everything at once. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and can I thank all of our panelists. We've covered a huge range of issues. We've talked about borders, about minorities, about access, about rights, and I'm sure there are many, many questions that you would like to ask. So I'd like to open the floor first to anyone who would like to ask a question. Yes.
Hi, I'm Maarten Lensink from the Netherlands, living in Finland, so I know I've got experience with this issue myself. My question is, if you have a service like Netflix or something else, where you'll have they offer content, videos, whatever, in a certain country. You have a subscription, you go to another country, and then you cannot access it. Why aren't you allowed that? Why do they block that, actually? What is their reason for that? That's actually something I missed. Is that due to the different law that they suddenly are under a different law?
I mean, in this, in fact, the problem is not geo-blocking, it's copyright. Netflix access to a set of content in a certain member state, paying a license to in case of movies, to the movie producers, basically, or to collectors of rights of movie producers. So Netflix in Belgium, for instance, is paying for the right to stream those content within the Belgian border. The consumer that access to Netflix in Belgium is paying for the right to watch that content in Belgium. If you go abroad and you want to access to that content from Italy, you should pay another license. You not pay for that right. This is important to stress. I mean, geo-blocking is not a problem. As things stand now, geo-blocking is a tool that prevents consumers to infringe copyright.
If I may ask a follow-up question, why isn't it, shouldn't the law simply be that you have the right to watch that content, dot? Why is there at all, why is there in the first place the limitation? How did that come to be?
It is basically a business practice that I've been already there for a couple of years. But basically, as Felice said, the right holders, those that own the contents, give a license, to distributors in different countries. The problem is that these licenses are absolute, which implies that you cannot even, as soon as you leave that country, you cannot access it anymore. You cannot access it in terms of whether, even if you have already the subscription, which is the case of the whole discussion around portability, but even if you have the cross-border restrictions, if you don't have a subscription, you want to get one from that specific country. But the problem here is really the absolute character of these licenses. And this is what, for example, the European Commission is investigating, DG COM is investigating in the frame of the contractual licenses between the Hollywood studios and Sky UK, which happen across the sector. So they happen for all distributors that use the same type of clauses. So yeah, it's a business practice that is in contradiction on one side with the single market, and that's what DG Competition is trying to tackle. But then you have also the problems of the clearance of rights, because as soon as you allow somebody that accessing that content from that provider from a different member state, then you will have all the right holders from that member state, the different collective societies, not knocking the door saying, hey, but you're allowing people accessing in my country. Therefore, you have to clear the rights there.
I may add, this is not a problem that affects only Europe, because the copyright territoriality comes from the WIPO treaties, so it's an international treaty. So basically, when a movie producers in Europe is not entitled with one right, but with 28 rights, one of which can be cleared, can be exploited in each member state. So as long as a right holder finds more profitable to sell 28 different licenses rather than just a pan-European one or a multi-territorial one, due to business of freedom and the copyright framework, this is possible. So this is the reason why. It's a matter of business. You make more profit this way, probably.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm Nina Konvalinka from Slovenian Party. I have a question that's more theoretical, but probably you already thought about that. So recently, Scotland had the referendum on secession, and there are, talks of other countries or other regions seceding as well. So what would in theory mean that for them in terms of the copyright and geo-blocking? So for instance, if Catalonia gets the independence, would then suddenly all the inhabitants of that place lost the access to the content that Spain paid for? Do you get what I'm asking?
I love this type of questions.
Yeah.
Of course, we don't, as an organization, we don't have a position on this type of referendum. It's more a citizenship issue. That's very conceptual. I guess that as soon as you have a new country, then they have to adopt their own copyright laws, ratify the different international treaties. So it's starting from zero, and you have more fragmentation. That's the only thing I can think of.
If I may add, for a while that will not be a problem of the European Parliament, I guess. So it's just a joke. So.
I could maybe add something coming from a very small region. There are some political parties, not in government at the moment in Åland, but that I know have been researching this. And their conclusion is that it would be not feasible since it's such a small population. There would be no economical interest from any of the right holders or service providers to provide this service on Åland or in any other small region. And a similar problem is also the domains. On Åland there is a specific domain called .ax that is not linked to the .fi, the Finnish domain. And for example, Google does not acknowledge this domain because it's too few consumers. So consumers on Åland cannot access the Google Play, for example. So you already have problems for small regions like this. Catalonia is, of course, a lot of more people, so maybe they wouldn't have the same problem. But you need to do to negotiate the licenses with everyone, and of course that's quite burdensome.
I think it's just important that if a big corporation like Netflix arrives in Catalonia, hopefully to serve 10 million speakers of Catalan, that you'd expect these corporations to offer that service. Why it's not doing that, I don't know. It should just be an automatic thing. Whether it means, therefore, that Catalonia has to become independent. Well, yes, obviously, in order to get proper services, regional languages will have to become independent states to get any kind of service, because that's where we're going to. And Catalonia shows it's leading the way by showing us this is one of the solutions that are now on the table, which maybe wasn't there before.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, hello. My name is Martin. I'm also a Slovakian living in Austria. And my question would be, what do you think is now the most effective way to get rid of geo-blocking? Do we propose regulations like this one which have an obligation to enable cross-border access, or do we just try to harmonize EU copyright, try to introduce the principle of the country of origin that is in the CEPS directive, and just to give the license holder, the broadcasters and the industry the possibility to broadcast all over Europe? Was it clear? Sorry.
Well, in my view, probably the better option would be some kind of harmonization of the EU copyright law to make sure that we find some kind of middle way between all the interests, both of citizens and also industries to some extent, and to make sure that we have actually a coherent approach to it rather than just tackling it step by step, in my view.
Yeah. Actually, it's clear we need legislative intervention. Then you can get different degrees of legislative intervention. You can think of a pan-European licensing system. You get one license for all countries, which personally I think that is politically very difficult to achieve and might raise also questions of subsidiarity. So the issue then is how we can then get a similar result, comparable result, without such a big legislative intervention. And here we have to look first at the sector. So if we look first at the audiovisual sector, perhaps that is more the more difficult one because of the licensing system that happened on a territorial basis. And to be clear, it's right that this happens, because many producers rely on the pre-financing of the selling on different territories. But still, this should not justify, that a provider cannot accept unsolicited requests of consumers that simply want to access the content like the locals would do in those countries. But as I said before, we need to clarify the legal framework. And here, as I said, the revision of the Satellite and Cable Directive can play an important role. But you will also need to adjust other areas of the copyright framework with certain exemptions and limitations, for example. So it's not only the issue of the distribution rights, but also the reproduction rights. So there are different things that have to be looked at. If somebody's interested in this, we did a study with Professor Hugenholz from the University of Amsterdam, who gave us some indications about what are the changes that will be needed to allow this cross-border access, and facilitate the clearance of rights in the frame of the Satellite and Cable Directive. Thank you.
If I may add, as I mentioned before, CEPS carried out a study comparing different options to create an internal market in the field of copyright. We compared in our study several options, going from no action to what we call soft law, so providing guidance, the communication, so on and so forth, going to a legislative intervention, a lightened one and a comprehensive one, and we also considered the option for a complete unification of copyright. So according to our analysis, this is of course the most effective option to create an internal market. This option comes at costs, because you are going to change basically the entire status quo, the licensing system, and so on and so forth. So we believe that this is the target to which the European Union should aim. We are aware, and as mentioned by Agustin, that now it's politically quite a sensitive issue, and also not very easy to achieve in the short run, but we should move toward that target step by step. For instance, we might introduce a kind of optional EU copyright registration system. So if you register your work in this system, you access to a pan-European right rather than to a national right. This might be an intermediate option that is already adopted in other fields, like the one of trademark. So we believe that, several steps are important. Probably the one of portability is a very small one, too small.
Any other questions? There, yes.
Thank you. Perm Rep of the Czech Republic. I have a very simple question on the concept of temporary stay. How do you interpret that concept? It's actually one of the key prerequisites in order to fall under the scope of the regulation. I do understand the example that, for instance, if you go for a study trip or if you go for a longer weekend, that falls under that concept. But in another case, for instance, if you get a habitual residence in another member state, for instance, in my case, living already now in Belgium for 7 years, do I fall under the scope of the regulation? Thank you.
I think this is one of the questions that was posed in the first presentation.
Can I give it a try? Actually, temporary means non-permanent. And I think it's funny because this brings so much legal uncertainty and stuff. Look, you have a subscription from one country where you have your credit card register, or actually you live there, But then you travel abroad for holidays. You are an MEP that comes to Brussels very often. So there are different reasons. So I don't think it would be a good idea to have one strict period saying, oh, just 2 weeks, because the needs of consumers are different. Some people, they simply travel abroad on a very regular basis, but they still live and have their place of residence in one country. Others, they just live in different countries at the same time. So it's really, if we provide something, for consumers, they have to be adjust the way they live. You might be abroad on an Erasmus for 6 months. That's temporary. You might be on holiday for 2 weeks. That's temporary as well. So we shouldn't be afraid, of this concept. On the contrary, it's something that actually could help people to access, their services irrespective of what they do abroad.
Sorry if I was stepping in, but I mean, instead I think that this is a very crucial issue. I mean, according to Spotify, which I mean is not a legislative source, but being temporarily abroad, if you have a free access, it is equivalent to spend 2 weeks abroad. So this is a definition made by a service provider. I think that the issue is quite important. I mean, currently myself, I'm resident both in Belgium and in Italy, so I don't know in which state I can subscribe legally a service and in which other I can port the service. At any rate, I think that is important because, I mean, with a non-clear definition of what is the state of residence and what is temporary abroad, we might end up in demolishing copyright territoriality with an instrument that is not meant for this. And this might be very risky because the side effect of this might be, even not considered by the legislator.
I'd like to ask Aleksandra a question that's related to this. You talked about mobility being natural, particularly for young people. And do you think that the borders online today are actually more restrictive than offline borders in terms of young people being able to move around the EU?
Thank you for the question. It's a really good one and something that we really love to discuss, especially in our association. I mean, indeed, in fact, 3 weeks ago, we were on a regional meeting in Berlin, and we were discussing the concept of borders in Europe. And to be honest, I wouldn't say that maybe the online borders are there are more online borders than the physical ones, because if we started thinking about all the potential not even conflict situations, but borders with even potentially limited access to Schengen, or with language borders, with political borders. Maybe it's not necessarily that the online world provides more of them, but for sure they are those that maybe that impact people in a probably most direct way on an everyday basis, because this is something, because maybe political borders or this kind of borders do not concern every citizen, but what people care about is what affects their everyday life. So these are the ones that they will actually feel the most, and I do agree that for the digital era that we live in, the legislation and the borders that we have do not comply to the challenges that are posed right now, and the lack of online public sphere, the lack of this cross-border access to information on a full scale, it is not in compliance with what should be the citizenship in the 21st century, for sure. So I agree with you that we have way too many borders in that sphere to in comparison of what are the needs of citizens and of what is the current status. Yeah, thanks.
I could have give a concrete example for this. For example, for both service providers and consumers on Åland, they had much more access to Swedish audiovisual media when it was a linear media. Now when it's play services and online services, they are totally excluded. So in that sense, it's really going in the wrong direction the more digital the environment gets.
Maybe comment, for instance, And indeed, if we think about what was the issue that raised the biggest amount of protests in Europe, also for young people, it was actually about ACTA. And for instance, when we were with our organization organizing a Why Vote campaign to encourage people to vote in the European parliamentary elections, to discuss various topics that were relevant for people, when we were saying what is the impact of EU on daily life, when we were mentioning some big things, they were maybe not necessarily that concerned, but when we started saying that, oh, but for instance, European Parliament blocked ACTA, that with which you wouldn't be able to watch TV series online or something like this. This was something that they started caring about and something that they actually saw that is very practical to their existence. So in this sense, I think there's a lot of work to do here.
Thank you. My name is Greg Pollard. I represent private broadcasters. I just wanted to come back to the temporary nature because I think it's good that we have this forum so we can talk about the different views on what that means. But at least in my mind, at a very personal level, when I read the definition, it's quite clear, actually, what temporally present means. And when it says temporally present means a presence of a subscriber in a member state other than the member state of residence, which clearly means that if you are outside your state of residence, you are therefore in a situation of being temporarily outside. So for most people, that will probably mean their holidays, right? But I guess those that are very favored by that status are expats who remain resident in their country and who come to work here. So there you go. You have a legislation that's very good for expats. Mr. Ansip will be happy.
Thank you for that. We're coming towards the end of the session. If there are no other specific questions, then could I ask each of our panelists just to sum up briefly in what is their reaction to the draft that the Commission put forward yesterday, and do you think it's going to solve the problems of the people that you represent, or at least move in the right direction towards achieving an agreement and legislation that will do that?
I think that it will solve the problem of 5 million European per day that move temporarily abroad, probably. And it's a very small step toward solving the problem of cross-border access to copyright and to create a digital single market for copyrighted good. This is my point.
I would say it's a baby step, but it's a very important step. So well done to the European Commission. Well done to the European Commission for doing it. And let's hope the European Parliament and the Member State will follow it, and they will not change it much. But so far it looks quite good. And then let's really start working hard on the geo-blocking part. The Commission promised, that this is just the appetizer. So then let's look for the main course. Thank you.
Well, I guess I will repeat already some things that were said. I do believe that it is an important step, but it is a step indeed to reach this true digital single market. Now it will, of course, facilitate the lives of people who already have subscriptions, but we should also think about in the future about the bigger picture and how to, in general, facilitate access to data, not only for subscribers and to try to reach out to the vision that was outlined some months ago.
With us at Ellen, and on behalf of the members, it's a step forward. We welcome it. It's a long overdue, but a step forward. I think the language dimension must be embedded at every step of this process. We want to see something like impact assessments with this and with things like the digital single market. Well, how is it going to impact on all languages, but regional minority languages, the ones that we work for? And if the EU really believes in respecting linguistic diversity, let's hope we can see some evidence of that as this proceeds. Thanks.
Well, I have to repeat that this is a very important but small step in the right direction. We see it as a good process to gather more evidence that there could be legally sound solutions that would make it possible to have a digital environment without geo-blocking, but that also wouldn't disturb the market's foundation. So it's a good way to start a discussion.
Good, and it's been a pleasure to chair a panel where there's so much agreement as well. And as I said earlier, we've covered so much ground, I think, in terms of this debate with good questions. And thank you all for taking part. Can I take this opportunity before I leave the chair to again thank Julia Reda and all of her team and my staff team, but particularly Julia's, for putting this seminar together today. It's extremely important to all of us. I think we know that more now than when we started the meeting this afternoon. We've got a short break now, coffee break, and it's inside the room. You'll see the coffee and tea has arrived there. So it's not outside, it's in here. So if you can all just take a short break to get some coffee, just for about 10 minutes, and then I'll hand over the chair to Julia. Thank you very much indeed.
And wait.
If everyone could take their seats, we're about to start with the second panel. Thank you. So, welcome to the second panel. We've heard a lot about why geo-blocking is a problem in the first place for different groups in the EU, but now it's really time to go into the nitty-gritty of the proposal that the European Commission has put on the table yesterday. This is the first piece of legislation on this broader copyright reform, and it has been quite eagerly awaited by us in the Parliament. And I'm sure when it comes to the details, there will probably be more controversy, and I very much also welcome participation from the floor. So if you're going to have any questions about the upcoming portability legislation, what it would mean, who is covered by it, who isn't covered by it. We want to cover all this in detail. We've already touched upon one of the controversial questions regarding the temporary portability in the first panel, and I'm sure we're also going to go into more detail on that. On a personal note, I was very glad to hear on the first panel this experience about the ACTA demonstration, which is something that I experienced myself. So before I was elected to the European Parliament as a member of the European Pirate Party, I was organizing protests against ACTA in Germany, and this was a very complex agreement. There were lots of things being covered by it, but the people who ended up going to the street, all of them were, or most of them were very young, and a lot of them were carrying signs saying this video is not available in your country. And you can argue about whether this was the core issue around ACTA or not, but it was certainly the thing that was on people's minds. And I think it shows that this is an area where people are actually asking for more Europe, and it's certainly encouraging to see that the new European Commission has made this one of its priorities. So I'm going to introduce the second panel. We're very glad to have Dr. Anna Herold from the cabinet of Commissioner Günther Oettinger with us today. So Commissioner Oettinger has been responsible for drafting this legislation and presented it yesterday. We have Dr. Benjamin Farrand from the School of Law of University of Warwick, where he's teaching intellectual property rights and particularly working on the interaction between law and politics, in particular the development of copyright law and policy at a European level. So basically he's studying us, which is quite interesting. We have Nicola from the European Broadcasting Union, which is a professional association of all the different national broadcasters throughout the EU, representing 73 member institutions. And we have Maxime Lacour, who represents EuroVoD, which is a Paris-based network of 9 different European video-on-demand platforms that are particularly specializing in independent cinema. So there we are also going to hear some perspectives from the industry about what it means working in the current environment and also preparing for this new legislative environment. And we're going to start with a round of introductions, some primary evaluations of the portability regulation, and then open for questions and discussions. Mr. Farrand, would you start?
Thank you very much. Firstly, I'd like to thank Julia for the invitation to speak and her team for organizing this event, and also to all of you for having so many people actually coming to hear what we have to say about this. So I have to admit, I first read the portability regulation yesterday, and my first impression was that I was very, very pleasantly surprised by what I was seeing. Working in the field of copyright law, I have seen a number of admittedly underwhelming attempts to increase the facilitation of cross-border digital media access in the European Union. There was the Creative Content Online initiative, which essentially sort of fizzled out in the late 2000s. There was the Digital Agenda for Europe, Licenses for Europe, and then we had the Digital Single Market Strategy. So the Digital Single Market Strategy, initially within academia, there was a certain amount of skepticism that this was yet another proposal, that there were going to be big changes in copyright law, and then nothing would really be seen as a result. In this particular instance, I think we can safely say that this is a very, very positive step in the right direction. At this point in time, could we say we have a digital single market? The answer at this point legally is no. Copyright still acts as a territorial right, meaning there is no such thing as a European Union copyright. It has national borders, which means by that, the extent of this, there is no digital single market. As a consumer and as a European citizen, you can give the same answer. There is no such thing as the digital single market. Now, out of curiosity, how many of you have traveled to Brussels specifically for this event? Okay, and how many of you have actually considered the fact that you might want to watch Netflix while you were here? Okay, that's a little bit disappointing, but what I would say is even if you wanted to, quite likely you would be unable to. Now, if you travel often, this tends to be the issue. And so the idea of the portability regulation is, at least for those people within Europe who are mobile, they can have access to content from their home state. So going into the specific details of the regulation, there appears to be, at the first point, a significant distinction between the paid-for service and the unpaid-for service. When we're talking about the paid-for services, such as Netflix, for example, the situation now appears to be quite clear. While you are temporarily present in another state, you should have access to the service that you legally pay for in your home state. The question, of course, when we're talking about, for example, public service broadcast, this is not as clear. Although arguably this would not be the place to deal with issues such as public service broadcasting. This would be much more a topic for Reed looking at the Cable and Satellite Broadcast Directive, Retransmission Directive, sorry. One key issue from the point of the consumer, necessarily rather than the right holder, is what the word temporarily present would mean. The intent of a regulation is to ensure a consistent approach by all member states. The initial concern I had, being firstly a legal academic, but secondly as a consumer, is, well, if there is no definition for this, does this leave it up to the right holders and the content providers themselves to define what would actually be temporarily present? This is something that could possibly be ironed out. It may be that in the impact assessment, which unfortunately I've only had time to briefly skim through at this stage, there is sort of expansion on what temporarily resident would mean, but this is an initial concern. Now, some of the issues that were brought up in the previous session had to do particularly with things such as linguistic diversity, such as access to content from a minority language in Europe, for example, where you were not based habitually within that particular state, such as the example of Åland being Swedish-speaking but technically part of Finland. At this stage, the portability regulations will not appear to deal with this issue specifically. What I would say is, while this is perhaps disappointing at this stage, it nevertheless does demonstrate the direction in which this particular field of law is developing. While we do have, for example, a unified trademark law for the European Union at this stage, and increasingly we have the moves towards the unitary patent, we do not yet have unitary copyright. Now, ultimately, this could be seen as being the ideal ending point, to actually have a unified single title for copyright in the EU. These issues would no longer really present the same challenges at that point. If material is considered to be protected by copyright within the European Union at a European Union level, distinctions between national territories then would no longer seem to apply any more than any other breach of the free movement of goods or services. While the portability regulation doesn't take us to that particular point, this is nevertheless a very, very positive step. And I think I would leave it there so there is time for future discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we're going to hear first a reception from the industry side. Maxime, you have the floor.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for inviting me, inviting our federation, which is, as you may see, EuroVoD, which is which was established in 2010, and as an association of independent VOD services in Europe, and founded by groups of right holders, producers, distributors, and sales agents of European and art house films. So we do represent altogether almost 18,000 films Europeanly. So it means the goal is clearly together with those other territories, companies in other European territories, to increase the transnational circulation of European films, to promote the discovery of European films among international audiences, to bridge the gap between European audiences, films and filmmakers, and to build an international community of European film fans to promote clearly also film literacy. So as you can see, we are having initiatives in France, Belgium, almost in the coming month in Luxembourg. We are present in Switzerland, in Ireland, Spain, almost in Portugal, Bulgaria, Sweden, and almost also in Italy. We do have also an possible extension in Germany, and we are approaching a project to launch a platform in the Netherlands and in Poland. So it means more than 325 million Europeans that we could reach with our catalogs, and to defend diversity clearly of and the accessibility to these European catalogs. So it means 1,500 multi-territory rights only cleared through the Belgium initiative, which I represent more specifically, and over 8,500 films straight on European territories. Now, I'm really happy to see the proposal made by the Commission here to go on portability, but at present, EuroVoD positions platforms may allow temporary access to registered user subscribers when traveling outside a territory in which they registered subscribed to the service. So to summarize, enabling portability raises a number of further issues that would need to be agreed and defined, including temporary access. We need to agree on definitions in terms of numbers of days, as it has been said, and as Julia explained now. We do need a consumer's territory what would we agree, what would be the definition of consumer's territory, country of residence, how to prove that the user comes from this territory, country in which consumers subscribed, country of credit card registration, etc. There is also questions regarding the content license agreements. We need to define on the proposal to define the legal fiction and protection. Legal fiction provides licensees to avoid being in breach of territories licensed from licensor when obligated under portability to offer consumers the content outside licensed territory. It's very precise. So what does legal fiction mean? Does legal fiction protect licensee from effective breach of licensees' agreements by being obligated to offer consumers access to content outside the licensed territory? Finally, protections of windows of exploitation. This is a real important point to be taken in account, the media chronology. It's really the specificity of Europe since 50 years, and which is really different than the specificity of the American studios operating the distribution on European territories globally, on multi-territorial distribution. Relating to new films, so this media chronology in first active window of exploitation, how to manage the protection of films licensed for all rights exploitation, theatrically led, when the same film is being actively exploited on VOD in other territories that enables consumers to access and view content in territories where there is an all rights distribution agreement in place with a third party. It's so, to be more precise, if a consumer regulation were to be introduced that gives consumer the right to access their service when abroad, we would need to define the number of days, a right that would need to be expressed in the terms and conditions that the user enters into with the VOD service, as well as being expressed in the license agreement between the VOD service and licensor. In relation to those license agreements that have already been entered into between the VOD service and the licensor, the Commission proposal is that they introduce a legal fiction, which means that a licensee that is providing consumers temporary access to films outside the licensed territory is not considered in breach of said license agreement. So the Commission foresees a period of transition where the licensees and licensor would have, for example, 3 months during which to renegotiate agreements. If after this transition period license agreements have not been amended, the Commission proposal is that this license agreement shall be deemed legal, no breach of contract has occurred by enabling consumer access to films outside licensed territories. The last point, the other key consideration, is regarding media chronology, as I said, and the protection of works that are in primary exploitation period, meaning new titles that are going through no rights exploitation in one territory, yet being released straight to VOD in another territory. For example, a French film, The Last Bastion, produced in 2015, will be released theatrically in France, which would trigger part of the film's subsidy funding conditions. Yet a consumer from Spain, where that film is already being exploited on VOD, will be able to view The Last Bastion in France by virtue of being a registered user subscriber to the Spanish service. So enabling temporary access in France could therefore jeopardize, and that's a real important point, the theatrical exploitation of The Last Bastion in France, which may lead local distributors to reduce the minimum guarantee fee payable for the film, and in turn it could reduce the other minimum guarantee, so that you have to pay to buy a film as a local distributor, that could have been generated across other exploitation windows, in effect reducing the territorial value of films generally. So we would also propose that therefore any portability regulation is introduced as stress tests, be undertaken to understand the economical, social and cultural impact of such regulation, including impact on revenues, exploitation potential, investment in the sector, circulation and visibility of European film, cultural and linguistic diversity, and competitiveness of the independent sector, which means, and not the GAFAN necessarily, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple and Netflix. or main studios, main European studios that could buy multi-territorial licenses on films, or necessarily only private and commercial televisions, which is also important, I understand. So that could be finally a real crisis for cultural diversity and representation of the minorities we were talking about. So to answer just a question of Mr. in the audience, why there is a limitation, there is a need to multi-territorial copyright, but no one is going to have interest in Portugal for a Flemish film. So cultural diversity is also representation of minorities in the value, the market. So why would we produce then a film in Flanders for the Flemish citizens, knowing that the films will not be bought for multi-territorial sales? So the gap between mainstream films that could be sold multi-territorially and films that would be only that would only be produced for cultural minorities regions of Europe is really to be taken in account in the proposal of the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm going to hand over straight to Nicola Frank.
Thank you also for inviting me here. I would like to give our first impressions on this new proposal, because it's really brand new and we have to further study it. As a principle, I think the EBU, and as you explained, the EBU represents public service media organizations in 56 countries, so including all of the EU countries, but beyond also. So as a principle, the EBU supports the idea of portability, but we certainly consider that the decision by a public service media organization whether or not to launch a portability service should be voluntary. And there's a reason for this, because public service media do normally not operate on the basis of a subscription model, which also would allow the control of the cross-border access. They offer their services free to air, usually. So they don't have this verification system in place. But we understand, I mean, according to what we have read in the proposal, that the regulation would not put any obligation on providers of online content services that do not have a contractual relationship with the consumer and that do not have a verification system in place. So that is how we understand this proposal. And while it should be voluntary, it is of course welcome that it enables portability in any case. But importantly for public service media, the temporary use of content abroad under a portability system should not require any additional authorization or any additional payment. And this is how we understand the proposal which is on the table. Then there is a specific point where public service media are a little bit worried that that PSM, that licensed content to third-party platforms, should not be liable to right holders in that if that content becomes part of the platform's portability service. So that it should really be the responsibility of this third-party platform to authenticate the use and to give portable access. Again, I think if we understand the proposal in the right way, that is what is foreseen. Now, I mean, we're not the only ones. We have heard that many times today already. The notion of temporarily present is maybe not 100% clear. Maybe if it's the case, as a colleague from the commercial broadcaster said, there is no time limit, effectively. Then we have a little bit of the worry that the longer, portability is offered, the bigger the potential is for misuse and that is, of course, what we want to avoid. That is very clear. Now, although the proposal is called cross-border portability, we do not believe that it really offers cross-border access, and for that, we strongly believe that more cross-border access to the broadcaster's content at least could be achieved by properly adapting the Satellite and Cable Directive, and other speakers have mentioned that today already. The availability of broadcasters online and cross-border content would certainly be improved if existing licensing solutions in that directive were adapted to in a technologically neutral way. And we appreciate in this context that the Commission is considering in its communication a revision of the Satellite and Cable Directive. And they say this is in order to enhance cross-border distribution of television and radio programs online. Adaptation of licensing as we propose would not put into question the contractual freedom and territoriality as exists under the current directive. There are clear provisions which allow this, and we think this would also be the case if you would extend it to the online world. And indeed, contractual flexibility and territoriality are crucial for the audiovisual sector and must be maintained. Contractual freedom enables rights holders and users to negotiate how, when, and where licensed content is offered in order to best match consumer preferences in the countries concerned. And territoriality underpins the funding of European works and has a positive effect on the whole creative value chain and cultural diversity. We believe that the SATCAP directive is an established proof of the fact that cross-border access can be achieved while maintaining contractual freedom and territoriality. Now, I would just like to give you some figures about the existing situation. SATCAP directive has been a huge success, we find, for further facilitating satellite broadcasting and the retransmission on cable networks across Europe, and thus significantly increasing cross-border availability of TV channels. In mid of this year, 2015, there were around 3,600 various TV channels available via satellite in Europe, up to 4,350 when you consider the various linguistic versions on the same channels. And what is also important, there are around 1,500 free-to-air satellite channels available in Europe without encryption. So it's not only being on satellite, but also having them without encryption on the satellite offer. For cable, it's also very interesting. Cable television is now available in almost all European countries, apart from Greece and Italy, which are satellite-dominated markets. But in the other markets, there are up to 4,000, around 4,000 TV channels in cable networks available. And the figures show also that over a third of all TV channels in Europe are available via cable, in particular among the 38 EBU members in the EU. 33 organizations broadcast at least one channel in another EU country's cable network. So this directive has clearly already provided cross-border availability of TV channels. If we could replicate this success in the online environment, that would be very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to hear from the Commission, Dr. Herold.
Thank you very much. So, well, of course, it's a bit difficult for me to be in a panel that evaluates the Commission proposals. Because, so I will try to maybe more, and most actually about the proposal has already been said. So I will not repeat, you know, the entire logic, but what I will maybe do is to provide a bit of clarifications, and then maybe that's the beginning for the discussion. And I have not heard everything in the first panel, so I might not be able to address all the issues that were raised there. So maybe Julia, you will remind me, and then I can respond. So first of all, what we have presented yesterday is, I think, as it was already said, but I think it's not enough repeating this. It's about people being able to carry with them the content that they have acquired in the member states of residence. So it's about me. That, well, to use the same example that Ben used, being able to continue watching my favorite content on Netflix when I am in Poland, Italy, or wherever on a business trip. So this is the proposal we have presented yesterday, and I will come then to a bit more detail in a minute, but of course, since this was discussed, I want to also make clear that we are also concerned about the, let's say, the other part of the problem linked to cross-border access issues, which is indeed about people being able to access content that are offered in other member states, that are not their member states. So it's about me being here, living in Belgium, habitually residing in Belgium, but I'm not going to make that confusion. Maybe I shouldn't be using the word, but it's about me being in Belgium and wanting to access content from Poland, because I'm Polish, so I want to watch it, from Italy, because I'm married to an Italian and I want to see the Rai, our favorite series on Rai online. I can't because it happened to be sold also in Belgium, so for very legitimate reasons, cannot be shown online by Rai. And it's also about me being able to subscribe to other offers, like, I don't know, Canal Play. I'm a big fan of French cinema, and unfortunately, I actually even managed to subscribe to Canal Play, and then, of course, I was geo-blocked, so it was really funny. They took my credit card details, but then, luckily, it was a free offer, so I could immediately, I just did it for sport, so it goes as far that you are actually able to subscribe, but then of course you can't watch it. So, unless of course you have other means that, well, I haven't been, I mean, I still get most of the French content I want here in Belgium, so I didn't, go farther than that. So these issues are important, and these issues are, I mean, of course, this is the examples I made are a leisure example, but of course, I think in the previous panel you discussed things that go beyond that. So it's really about legitimate interest of people that might really, have reasons to get to be able to get the content that unfortunately is not offered in the member states where they live. So these issues are important, and as it was already said as well. And we are currently looking at them, and as it was announced also in yesterday's communication, we will try to provide solutions to these problems as well. However, with the understanding, as I think the colleague here from EuroVoD already explained, that these are trickier issues because of the fact that funding, especially of European cinema, is based on the current territoriality model, and especially on pre-financing that is linked to that. So while, of course, it's my legitimate interest to get all this content that I was mentioning to you from other territories, I still care that this content is actually produced in the first place. So I really understand that maybe if we were to opt for solutions that would be a bit too simplistic and just apply one-size-fits-all solutions across Europe, might basically put into question the very rationale for this local, nationally flavored content to be produced in the first place. And I care about this. I care about this wonderful French films on Canal Play. I care about Montalbano, which is my favorite series in Italy. And of course, I care about the Polish cinema that is doing actually very well. So these are my general remarks about this two-pronged approach. We understood that portability is an issue that indeed can be addressed in a shorter term and with a rather straightforward solution, while the issues of cross-border access are more complicated, and we'll be looking at them via several reflection strands. Of course, one has been already mentioned, the possible review of the CAPSAT directive or use of its certain mechanism to facilitate provision of content, of certain types of content online. And we are, of course, looking also at ways how to encourage, actually, right holders and service providers to agree on solutions that would indeed allow for certain types of cross-border access. That might also vary according to the situations. You know, there might be different situations for different languages. This is not an easy issue. This is my main point, that the cross-border access issues are not easy. Where we think that portability issues might be easier, and this is why we presented yesterday the proposal that was already, I think, rather well described. So it may be very quickly about certain elements of the proposals that have been already discussed. So first of all, it is indeed for people that are habitually residing in a member state, in the member states, which is the member states of their residence. And it's not very complicated. Normally, you would have only one member state of residence. And whatever you will be doing while not being in the member states of residence would be considered as temporary presence. So this is the definition we have taken. We don't think, coming to the points of Maxime, that we should provide for any time duration for that temporary presence, because that would be extremely artificial. There might be very different situations that we would like to cover. It might be people going for short periods on holidays, business trips. It might be also people commuting. So there might be people going for longer study periods while still habitually residing in their member states of residence. And once this stay becomes a residence, then of course they change their member state of residence. So coming to the point I think Greg was making, I was going there and back, so I'm not sure whether I got it right, but it's not for expats, huh? So it's not for me. We will not be, because I am habitually residing in Belgium. So it's not about where you have an address, you happen to have a second address or the original address. It's really about the reality, where you reside. What we can certainly say, and it will not, maybe an important point to what Ben was saying, it will not be up to the right holders and the service providers to agree on the duration, because otherwise we would defeat the very purpose of the regulation to have something which is applicable in a consistent way for all the European citizens. What they can, of course, agree about, and this is a second important concept in the regulation, is the actual means to verify that someone is effectively residing in his or her member state of residence. So this is indeed important. That was also the reason why we have decided to limit the scope of application to services that are provided against payment or maybe also without monetary consideration, but where there is a possibility for the service provider to actually verify the member states of residence of that person. So the fact that you will be able to verify may mean that you could also agree. So the right holders might very well agree with the service providers that after a certain period, so beyond a certain duration of time, and provided that they may also agree on the modalities of the actual verification. So they could also agree, I don't know, that on a recurring basis, for example, on the basis of IP sampling, the service providers would be checking, is this person effectively using the service? Where is this person effectively using the service? And if they come to the conclusion that someone is permanently using this service outside his or her member state of residence, they may well agree that this service might be discontinued because it's abused. So I think that there is enough in the regulation to prevent abuse, to prevent portability turning into cross-border access. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense for us to work on the cross-border access issues in the longer term. So this is I think, the first area of considerations. Otherwise, we have a broad scope of application in terms of what sort of services we cover. So basically, it's all the professional media services that are out there in the market. So including copyright-protected content, but also content that might not have copyright protection, like sports content. This is, of course, important because it's, about everything what you can carry with you in terms of professional media content that you want to consume when you are going somewhere else. And to reply maybe a bit to what Maxime was saying, we don't think that this sort of, the legal fiction, I think, is more or less clear. So how we achieve all of this is because we consider that the service is actually happening is deemed to be occurring in the member states of residence, and this goes for both copyright protected content, which means that the copyright relevant acts are actually happening in that member states, and also for the other part of the service. Where I think I should still provide a word of clarification is to the idea of Maxime. I'm not sure whether I understood you well, but you were, I think, implying that this might still cause prejudice to the rights sold in other territories that the person could be visiting. So there, I think we have, since we have decided to limit this only for portability purposes, we really don't see how this prejudice would happen. You see, because, since you don't provide for cross-border access, I mean, it's a bit difficult to see the prejudice, but we might discuss it if you want. And certainly with this regulation, we do nothing against the current system of windowing, which, of course, is entirely preserved. So I am not sure whether I understood, because you have also mentioned the windowing, the windows. So I'm not sure how this... but certainly this is not an intention that, we don't think there would be any impact on this. So, I think that's for now. I don't know whether there has been, or maybe one final point, sorry, I was too long, I'm sorry. But I think it's also important, I think it was implied in the previous, again, I haven't been listening very carefully, unfortunately, but it was implied that, portability would be a rather marginal issue. We don't think it solves all the issues, as I think I have explained. But I think it will solve, we have probably here in Brussels a very particular view, because, we are different. We are moving a lot. We are expats, so it's a bit, probably we have a very particular view. But of course, we have based our regulation on, and the reason why we have decided to deal with these two issues, portability and cross-border access, in two parts, is clearly because, we consider that these are, as I was trying to explain in the beginning, issues that might have different impacts on the audiovisual industry in particular, because that's where territoriality is important. But it's also because we think portability is something which is demanded by people, which is demanded and which counts. So I have been asking my colleagues to remind me of figures before the meeting, and the figures actually rather encouraging, because our careful estimates, because of course, these are kind of very complex estimates where you have to be careful, show that nowadays portability could matter to 29 million of Europeans. I think it's a lot, and by 2020 to 72 million. So it's not certainly something which is marginal. And again, this might change very quickly because people, especially young people, will all start moving more and more. So I don't think it's a marginal issue that will matter only for a very small part of European population. So that was my last point. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Maxime, I will give you a chance to reply if you like, but I would also take the chance to dig a bit deeper into this question about the temporary exit, whether there should be a time limit or not. I guess one difference would be that if you have a fixed number of days, the services offering this would have to track how much a customer is actually using this. And I would like to know from those representatives in particular who are actually running platforms, first of all, how difficult do you think it will be to implement this proposal in practice? And also for the public broadcasters in particular, since you are not charging money, is this an attractive proposal? Do you think that some public broadcasters may actually enable this portability offer and for this purpose start asking for people's residency information? And I think it also raises a broader question about how much personal data do the viewers have to give up in order to make use of this proposal. Would you like to start?
So regarding the technical aspects, how to track the users, it's possible. We can track this. Well, I'm not technical, but I know that we answered this question through the workshops we organized regarding this proposal from the Commission, the DSM, Digital Single Market Proposals. So it's possible to track now. As you said, there is the question of the numbers of days, or should this be being regulated or not. This means also to have new contracts that fix those new conditions. I have only just for Benelux territories almost 250 different contracts with 250 right holders from the entire world. So and we are a little territory, so it means little team, little money to operate this. So it means it's complex. It's quite complex. Now it's possible to track. So to answer your questions, now to answer, if maybe I let you, Mrs. Frank, answer on your side.
Yes, I mean, as I said, I think. It's a proposal. The portability proposal will be interesting, maybe for some public broadcasters in the future. But currently, the fact is that since they are offering free-to-air services, they usually not. They usually don't have in place a subscription system for their online systems. So, if some of them are considering maybe in the future to offer this portability, they will have to install these systems, and of course they have to think about it carefully because, as you mentioned, I mean, there are data protection issues, there are technical issues, there are a lot of other issues involved. So for those who will do it, they will carefully look at all these issues and decide whether it's worth doing it, of course. And then it's a cost issue also, it's very clear. So if you they have a public service remit, they have to do certain things, and establishing this kind of sign-in system will represent more costs. But it's absolutely not excluded that some of our members will go into this direction. But at this point in time, it's very difficult to say. I mean, they are looking at this now.
Somehow, I just want to precise. Also, we face this procedure that would need to check the ID to know exactly from where the user, the end user, the citizen would have access to a territorialized offer. In fact, what it means, because credit cards or addresses, postal addresses, doesn't mean nothing. It doesn't match with this question of territoriality. What we were discussing with the Conseil supérieur de l'audiovisuel here in Belgium regarding the access to children's under 18 years to some specific art house films. that would not allow them to be watched on the internet. It's also a European regulation. That means a lot for me as a secretary of the European Children's Film Association. But the only way is to check those IDs physically. This means finally that, in my opinion, but this could be and should be brainstormed with some experts, the only way is to check those IDs is possible for IPTVs and cable operators that has physical shops in every country. So, I mean, if we speak about the Belgium case, Proximus has shops everywhere, so they can check your ID, so that they would allow you to access those films with the codes that they give you. Those films limited to adults, for example. So it's the same kind of the same process and difficulty we can face with the question of territoriality. If finally it's only the IPTVs and cable operators, or eventually the big players that could have physical checks of IDs that would have the chance to be part of this new multi-territoriality organization, cross-boarding access to films, it may be difficult also for diversity. I'm not saying that there is no solutions. There may be solutions, but this must be analyzed in detail.
Maybe one thing, I mean, because I haven't said that, but I mean, I hope it is clear that, voila, I mean, for the services that, well, to answer to Nicola, I mean, for the services that she was mentioning, voila, this is not applicable. The obligation is not applicable, but voila, but it's open in case they start verifying. And if I may allow myself a personal comment, it is not something on which we particularly probably base the reasoning of the current legal instrument on the table, but I think overall, and this is my impression as someone involved in let's say, in the content discussions, the future content discussions, I think overall the tendency in the provision of digital content services will be towards personalization. So probably, you know, this will only increase. Maybe that might not be the case for the moment, for good reasons, for certain services available free online, where you. And well, we are not forcing anybody, but I think overall, the tendency will go more and more towards this personal relationship with the customer, and that, of course, raises other issues, which I think, as Nicola was also mentioning, might also raise privacy concerns. I mean, would we have introduced? I mean, would we have given as a possibility to the service providers also, and of course the right holders that will then discuss this with the service providers, is the possibility to put that in place. And in terms of actual, because I think costs were also mentioned, and there I don't mean for those that do not do it now, but for those that are already doing this in order to geo-block. I mean, I'm not a technical person, but it will be more a question of reconfiguring the geo-blocking into something else. So, voila, I don't think for those that are already verifying today that this would imply particularly, voila, new costs and technical terms. And maybe a final point on the privacy. What we have explained, because of course this has been discussed also with the European Data Protection Supervisor, and I think the effective means of verification as they are put forward in the regulation is a broad notion. What is, of course it does say that it has to be necessary and cannot go beyond no? Well, what does the legal Vita tell me? It has to be necessary, that cannot go beyond?
Proportionate and not to go beyond what is necessary.
Voilà. Thank you. And the example that we give in a recital that probably continuous monitoring of someone. I mean, we don't want to have new mass surveillance measures for European citizens. That's clear. Eh? But there are other proportional means of verification, IP sampling, that already, you know, and it's exactly the same measure, technical measure, that is used for geo-blocking. So it's, you see what I mean? It's the direction of the measure. So I think that it shouldn't present a particularly, I mean, like uncertain, and this is used for by all service providers, small and big. So voila, so that was more or less my point.
But what would be proportionate for verifying your residence? So would you have to go to a store and show your ID card, or are we talking about something like having a credit card in their country?
I mean, we have not harmonized in the regulation, Vita, correct me if I'm wrong, the actual conditions that the providers already under which the providers already provide services nowadays for people in their member states of residence. So they might change those if they feel that they have to have an additional because of the technological development, in order to prevent that someone, I don't know, like uses the same PIN codes for multiple persons. So I don't know. I mean, I have no idea. I mean, they may evolve, but certainly we are not harmonizing the actual conditions for the. Vita, you wanted to add something?
Chairwoman allows me, and
yes,
thank you, Anna. Just to add for clarity, in the recitals, the notion is a bit described as the notion of reasonable indicators. So it is absolutely not about showing ID card physically. We know that in certain member states, not all citizens do have an ID card, and there is absolutely no intention to impose it. The indicator should be reasonable so that the service provider and right holders are reassured that there is no abuse. On the other hand, they should be proportionate and not go beyond what is necessary. And here we deliberately actually left it open, Anna will confirm, because we've been speaking with industry and the methods develop very quickly. Like today, we check, could be some utility bill or address or phone number. Like in a few years, it could be like absolutely different means, like some interactive measures, no face recognition systems, where there is already somewhere in the data system, and the methods really develop. And here we should be mindful that also it should go along with data protection rules. And being too prescriptive in the regulation could be counterproductive. The same as counting exact number of days and surveying Europeans, how many days they spent in which member state, could also be counterproductive for the same purpose. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I would now like to open the floor for questions. Please introduce yourself and who you're directing the question to. Of course, you can also ask all the panelists, please.
Hello, my name is Erwin Steinhammer. I'm from Austria, and I have the question: will I in the future be able to use Tor for watching my news at home?
So in case not everybody knows what Tor is, so if you're using technical means to tunnel your IP address, so it looks like you have an IP address from another country, but you actually don't. It's similar. There are different technologies for that. Tor would be one of them, but the result would be the same. Will this be affected by the regulation?
No, it won't.
Just to add, I think there are also a lot of people in Brussels using VPNs, and that's, I think, an open secret. So I think it would be at least controversial to try to do anything about that.
And if I may, Julia, this is precisely we are trying to do something on the cross-border access issue.
Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Emilia Yvropoulou. I'm from Greece. I'm a lawyer, and as for the data protection issue that occurred, I was thinking, okay, openness is something good, gives some flexibility, and I can understand that, but how far are we from bad exploitation of this openness and this flexibility? Because either private companies or maybe governments might misuse this openness and lead to this mass surveillance that we don't actually want. So maybe we should foresee the problem and have some guarantees now before it's too late.
I mean, as I said, I mean, we have sufficient safeguards in the, I mean, if you now mean the regulation, because you meant in relation to this, as I said, I don't think we are introducing something new. I mean, these techniques, like IP sampling or whatever other technique might be out there in the market, are already used. I mean, they are nowadays, they are used to block my access to net reason. I'm in Poland. And voila, so the same technique could be used to check whether I'm using the service from Poland. You see what I mean? So I don't think we are introducing anything which goes, you see what I mean, beyond, and there are sufficient safeguards, and this is explained in the recital, that voila, that this is not about continuous monitoring of people, you know, via, I don't know, tracker, GPS, or whatever else. I mean, this is, so I mean, Vita, you have been discussing this with our privacy experts, and I think this is no fair description of the intention, that we are not adding anything new, any new, voila, so we are not changing the current sort of privacy ecosystem as it exists in Europe on that, with that.
If I may add to this question, but for blocking someone, you just need the location, but for allowing access, you need more detailed information. So actually, it is more, you know, you need more information, while for blocking, you just need the location. So I don't think that it's the same as geo-blocking. Allowing access is more particular.
So you're talking more about the information you need to provide to show where your residency is.
Yes, to show access, to show that you are a temporary traveler.
So you're referring not about the possible checking whether someone is effectively, where he or she is effectively using the service, so this is what I referred to, so that is clear, but about the actual conditions of for acquiring the service. But again, I think we have explained that, and Vita confirmed, that we are not, again, not changing anything in the current conditions under which the services are subscribed to in the respective territories. But of course, this might change, and I think this was the point Vita was trying. I mean, I tried to make it, and you explained it a bit further, that the ways, the conditions might evolve with the technology as well, and there is nothing wrong in this. I think this is absolutely justifiable, and this was a bit also the point I was trying to make in the beginning. I mean, not in the beginning. I mean, in one of my reactions, that probably there will be a trend to more and more personalization of the service. I mean, it is no secret that the service providers will more and more rely on data. I mean, they are already relying on data. Sometimes we might not be aware of this, but this is no secret that this will happen at all levels and all sorts of services that we might be consuming in the future. So it's just a trend, and we have. Precisely for that, we have the discussion on privacy and the new privacy data protection rules also that we have soon in the EU. So it's, voila. This regulation certainly does not change it.
Felice Simonelli from CEPS, who was not here before. I'm an economist, not a lawyer, so probably, you know, I like to make reasoning in terms of assumption. let's make an assumption. I am resident in Belgium. I have an Italian credit card, and I subscribe Sky in Italy. So, I mean, a broadcaster provides also Sky Go, this VOD service abroad. Nowadays, Sky is obliged to block the provision of service abroad. So, I mean, I cannot access Sky because it's geo-blocked. I might try to do it via a VPN, and I'm infringing copyright. After hopefully this piece of legislation will be enacted, I do the same. I subscribe Sky in Italy with my credit card. I come in Belgium. Sky keep on monitoring myself, and I'm probably permanently based in Belgium. What is the incentive that Sky has to, I mean, ask me to stop paying service and pay to Proximus for the same services? This is, I think, a key point, because, I mean, Sky is taking my money each month. Why they should stop to asking me for money and say, okay, no, what you're doing is not temporarily being abroad, but is permanently being abroad? What is the incentive?
Well, I mean, this is actually a very good question. It's something that keeps coming up in a lot of the more academic discussion on this issue, that people will find ways of accessing this material either with or without the permission of the right holder. In some cases, you're still paying for it legally and using a VPN or proxy as a way of actually accessing this content. Worst case scenario, people start actively pirating it. If you want to look at what is the most pirated TV show on the internet at the moment, and has been for the past 3 years, it's HBO's Game of Thrones. One of the things that is repeatedly brought up in this context is they are deliberately making it difficult to access legally on the internet, with the end result that people then actively pirate it. Which in this respect really makes you wonder what exactly the incentive is of blocking services where people are willing to pay money in order to access them, particularly if you're talking about somebody that does have an Italian ID card, somebody that is able to prove their connection to that state, even if they don't happen to be resident in that state at that particular time. And it's not just the case of people that work in different places. My concern when it comes to this means of verification and the idea of when use becomes discontinued. I mean, are we talking about Erasmus students? Do they have to make sure they're back during the winter vacation? And if they're not, then they could lose the access for the spring term? I mean, there needs to be some sort of way of actually ensuring that this doesn't actually, again, turn people to other means of accessing this content. Because too restrictive an approach, particularly when it comes to the means of verification, when people have concerns about data protection, when they have concerns about their privacy, they'll say, well, if it's easier and less sort of actively monitored, why not just pirate?
A question back there?
My name is Jonas Holton. I'm from Sweden, but I'm currently an Erasmus student in the Netherlands. And I was just hopefully a very simple question. What is the current legal status on geo-blocking circumvention using something such as a VPN or Tor?
Yes, we've heard different interpretations of that. So is it legal to circumvent geo-blocking by using a VPN? I guess that's an academic question.
Well, I can start. That's a good question. Firstly, one of the issues is the 2001 Copyright Directive, or the Information Society Directive, where if you consider geo-blocking or rather the use of virtual private networks as a way of circumventing geo-blocking, this could be considered as a means of circumventing a technical prevention measure, which is essentially a digital rights management software under Article 6 of the directive that says that you are not able to actually circumvent technology, even in this particular case, to actually access content that would otherwise be legally accessible. So one of the big academic discussions is one thing that really needs to be revisited is the approach to this particular issue, because it does create a bit of a grey area. If we consider it to be a form of technical protection measure, then this means that circumvention by use of a virtual private network could then potentially constitute an infringement of copyright. The problem is that the Article 6 actually creates something they call a sort of secondary copyright. It's additional protection for the prevention measure itself, as well as actually using it to protect the copyrighted material. So the argument there is that technically it could be considered as being an infringement of copyright.
So everybody in Brussels is a pirate.
Yeah, exactly. I would have the same interpretation as you, Ben. But we also have to bear in mind that you might use a VPN connection to be able to access a service that you are paying for. You know? So, for example, I have a friend who used a VPN connection to watch the BBC iPlayer, and this friend, it's an infringer, and according to that interpretation, because you're bypassing a technical protection measure to access content. But I have another friend who uses VPN connection to access Netflix, you know, in the US, because he has a wider repertoire. But this friend is paying for an account there. So it is also an infringer if you're paying actually for the content.
Well, I mean, the problem is whether you should be considered and whether you are is something different. The way that Article 6 is written is it's not really intent-based. It's whether you do it or whether you don't. If it's the use of a VPN generally, such as you may do with academia, for example, to access journal articles when you happen to be in another country or another place where certain material is kept on an internal server, then of course the use of a VPN in itself is not actually a general infringement. It's what you actually use that virtual private network for that then becomes the problem. When it comes to the use of it specifically for the purposes of circumvention of a geo-block, arguably whether it's to access the BBC or whether to actually pay for Netflix, it still would constitute an infringement of the copyright, even if arguably you're still paying for the content in question.
I would like to take a few minutes to look beyond the portability regulation itself, because we have heard a couple times that some of the issues presented in the first panel about linguistic minorities, about language learners, and also this entire broad world of offers that actually aren't subscription-based. The public broadcasters, the advertising-based platforms such as YouTube and Vimeo, they won't be touched by this portability regulation. So I would like to ask, because the Cable and Satellite Directive has come up a couple of times, would this be a good compromise, in your opinion, on this question of whether to touch territoriality of copyright or not? And should it only apply to the websites of broadcasters, or should we also be talking about advertising-funded platforms? To everybody, I suppose.
Well, in my opinion, there is clearly an interest to organize portability clearly for expats. It's almost millions of Europeans that could be touched by their proper cinema. I was explaining the case of those Belgian films that one woman is trying to sell worldwide, but it seems really hard to get those cinemas seen abroad. Whatever there is a expat community, it's an example, but there is like 200,000 French people living in London. This is a huge market. If in somehow they could have an access to Canal Play Infinity services in London, could be fantastic somehow. But there is also the case of those. For example, this Portuguese production from Manuel de Oliveira, for example, that could be sold in Belgium to a local independent distributor that love this film, that love to make him reach an audience in Belgium. There is 50,000 Portuguese people in Brussels. This could be a potential audience. If those people have an access to this content through a cross-boarding regulation that makes that, because of their address, probably address in Portugal, that they would have for vacation or from their family, that would give them the access to those films in Brussels. It could be fantastic, but the films would have no existence in Belgium. So it means I'm trying to be clear here, to the local distributor, understanding that the films could be reachable to 50,000 Portuguese people, will not buy this film. This film will have no existence in Belgium. So this is a really cultural and economical balance that should be taken in account. I have no answers on this point, but I know that reaching all French people having an address in Belgium worldwide or already Europeanly could be grow our revenues, so and grow the cultural recognition of our Belgium cinema to the Belgian people abroad. This is a point of view that must be balanced.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, we definitely think that an extension of the satellite and cable directive to broadcasters' online programs would certainly help to make more programs available also cross-border. It would certainly not be a solution for all the programs, that is very clear, but I mean, particularly for the own productions of the broadcasters, this would provide for more legal certainty. And for example, for a news and current affairs program, in our members' programs, that represents roughly 25% of their programs, and this would certainly be something they could make available cross-border much more easily. And I'm sure that, for example, the Portuguese community in Belgium, they would like to have better access to news programs from their country, for example. I mean, this would certainly be a progress. But also for feature films, you know, the fact that broadcasters are a very particular situation, they have to clear loads and loads and loads of rights, and to make that more efficient will enable them also to offer more content online. No? So a major broadcaster has to conclude more than 70,000 contracts every year, license contracts. So in order, if you have that in a, and you mentioned also the amount of contracts, it's a very complex and very comprehensive work they have to do. So if that is, this licensing process is made more efficient, then they can offer more also content online and cross-border for that matter.
Okay, talking about not only the portability regulation, but the communication on copyright generally in the direction of EU copyright law at this stage. My honest impression is the direction we need to be moving in is in the unification, the idea of creating the European copyright. The way that I see it, even in the discussion of the portability regulation, half the discussion has been, but how can we still maintain a certain amount of market partitioning, despite the fact that this is coming within the context of the digital single market. So the way I see it is that so far market-based solutions have not been particularly effective in this field. With creative content online, for example, the idea was if we leave people to allow the market to develop, then the market will develop, we will have solutions to these issues, it will be fixed. We had it again with the licenses for Europe. Licenses for Europe, there was a big memorandum of understanding, there was a move that we were going to make this easier, we were going to make licensing more readily available. According to the impact assessment, actually there hasn't seemed to be any movement on this since the initial statement that this was actually happening. Market-based solutions don't necessarily seem to be either facilitating nor unduly restricting access to minority language content. The fact that actually copyright can act as a restriction on this content would suggest that perhaps when we're talking about particularly linguistic diversity, trying to actually secure it through the use of copyright as the legal means is not actually going to be the most effective way of doing it. And to provide one way of example, or one example at least, the UK itself, despite comprising multiple different languages, has one single copyright applicable to the entire UK, and yet we still seem capable of producing Welsh and Gaelic language content. So therefore, I think that actually we're talking about two separate issues that are, in some ways get linked in a way that maybe to a certain extent really loses clarity. There are issues of linguistic diversity, definitely. Linguistic diversity is and should be promoted. But the question is copyright really the means by which we're supposed to achieve that? And I think that using this as an argument for why we should actually hold back on creating a unified copyright title is not really the right way to proceed on this particular issue.
It's a bit difficult for me to intervene after a plea for a European copyright title. So I'll try to be diplomatic because I hope you will all understand that this is something that we are now currently working on. So and we have just finished the consultation on the review of on the possible review of the CAPSAT directive, and we have, I think, given the maximum that we could give in the communication in terms of preview what we would like to be doing on the cross-border access to content. I think it's clear that we understand it's an issue, but we also understand, I think what Maxime was trying to explain, that currently financing of European audiovisual works is based on these, on very much on territorial exclusivity. And voilà, so maybe just to finish with the same example that I was making in the beginning. As much as I would love to be able to watch the forgotten already parts of my Montalbano series that I love so much, I'm happy that it was sold in Belgium and that I cannot, because it's a good content, and I got it. I have it. I have a full collection, and I still can. I'm not saying it's not. I mean, if we can try to find solutions that this producer of Montalbano will be offering this on a distribution channel, I think this is also something that we should be working on. Then I'm very happy to think very hard about these ways. Huh? But I don't think we should be putting on the table solutions that would disregard the possibility of, for Montalbano, for this particular piece of content, to be successful in European markets. So that was a bit my point. But coming, and unfortunately, I hope you will understand that I won't be able to tell you what we will do on the CAPSAT. What is clear is that we will be working on the CAPSAT probably within this sort of because this is the instrument we might be taking inspiration from, and there will be certainly a lot of thinking going not only into what Nicola was said, so about facilitating as much as possible provision of content that is probably less problematic to be provided across the borders because it's own productions, or but we will also put a lot of thinking into what we can do to make provision of this most valuable content, which is obviously premium films, series also. And there, the only point I'm trying to make is that it's probably not so easy as it was in the portability regulation, for the reasons that I tried to explain. So it's trickier. And there might be ways, and the opening of the industry, I might come back to your last point about licenses for Europe, to look towards solutions is certainly greater now. Maybe it's because of the pressure, maybe it's because of the fact that this issue has become so present in the public sphere and the discussions, no? So maybe it's also thanks to Julia and your presence on the topic, certainly partly. But I think that there is much more willingness on the part of the actual content owners to look into ways, to actually they're kind of more willing to provide their content across borders. Of course, the question is how we can help them responding to this market demand that is there. You wanted to?
Yeah. I just want to look after some solutions that could be eventually taken in account in the analysis of Julia and her team. Here there is eventually two things that could be taken in account. So on portability, it's important that introducing portability would involve the VOD, speaking about VOD, especially service having the technology available to temporarily block and unblock user access outside their country of residence. So, as I said, this is technically possible, as we understood. And to propose that, we would propose that the films made accessible to consumers temporarily do not breach any exploitation windows in the territory. where the consumer wishes to have temporary access, as such avoiding consumers seeing a film on VOD that has only just been released theatrically. So if, I mean, Metropolitan Film Expo in France is releasing 1+1 by Claude Lelouch, and that they invest 1.5 million euro to promote it, to make these films exist, to make discover this fantastic cinema to the French audience, to have these films available to all by all other people from abroad living in France would need. This is not as much secure as it should be regarding the investment of the promotion, the launch, the theatrical launch organized in France. This, for example. So this must be taken into account, in our opinion, on accessibility. Well, it would be probably possible with the with a push, with a support from the Creative Europe program, so that there would be as much as possible, or this is legally to fix. Maybe a bit more on a strict way, so that there would be a professional agreement that if films have not been sold to a national distributor in a European territory after a certain period of time, let's say minimum 36 months, after the first release in Europe, the right holder, sales or agent or producer should make his best efforts or more. We could be more strict on the fact that those films would be also co-produced by public bodies, by public funds. Generally in Europe it's the case. And to handle the sales directly to the platform in this given territory. So any film that would not have been released in a country 36 months after its first release in one European territory should be activated and with local platforms that aim to have those films. This would not be easy to it would not be easy to convince the main players in Europe. I'm also talking about those private broadcaster that would eventually, like TF1 in France, have an activity in of distribution of their rights in Switzerland, or Studio Canal, for example, the Canal Play that has an activity in Germany and in Great Britain. But if there was a better regulation on those questions of availability of films for some territories, it could help on circulation of those films.
We're going to do a last round before we have to conclude.
Okay, sure. Really just one point on the video on demand and theatre, because it really brings to mind two Court of Justice decisions that were really dealing with some of these issues. The first being Codatel, and one of the issues with Codatel was, unfortunately, it was decided at the point when we were really concerned about satellite broadcasting, but it nevertheless set something of a legal precedent. So very briefly, Codatel was about this sort of issue about theatre release windows and then the accessibility by satellite broadcast of audiovisual content. And the reason that the Court of Justice said that territoriality could overrule access to the service in this particular context was the need to calculate royalties. Because with a broadcast spectrum where it's just one signal going out to many, many people, essentially free at the point of use by those individuals, they said calculating royalties became very, very complicated when you were talking about this cross-border issue. If we're talking about theatre release windows and video on demand, the video is being paid for. There's a way of actually assessing and calculating the amount that should be paid to the right holders in these particular contexts, which then relates quite strongly to the Premier League case, where the Court of Justice said there was a right to appropriate remuneration, not essentially the right to get as much money as conceivably possible from this sort of development. Will video on demand necessarily cannibalize theatre? There have been various studies and cultural studies about this, and it really seems that in some respects you were talking about two completely separate markets. Video on demand is not the same as going to the theatre, because the theatre very much is about the experience as much as the movie itself. And one of the things they were talking about regarding piracy was, if you want to go see the new Star Wars movie, what are you going to do? Are you going to download a copy and watch it on your laptop screen, or will you go to the cinema where you get to see it on a 78-inch, projector screen? So there is this concern that we can't use pre-existing precedents regarding different technologies to then determine what we do with these new technologies, where there are accurate means of actually ensuring and calculating things such as royalty payments to right holders.
Well, I think I have exhausted my capacities. Well, I mean, I think I can only thank Julia for organizing this event. I think it's good to have this discussion, especially with a lot of young people that might look at these issues from a different perspective, but might be also the actual addressees of what we want to put on the table. So both the portability and the other measures that we might be putting on the table certainly will speak more to young people that are by definition more mobile and more technologically savvy. So I think I can only encourage you to continue and hopefully to have a discussion a bit more in detail once we know more, a bit closer to the release of our proposals next year on the cross-border access. And of course, we count also on a very constructive discussion and making clear that portability might not resolve all the issues, but it's an important part of the equations, and we have to get it through very quickly through the co-legislative process. So we count on your help. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I just should say also thank you for this discussion. I think it's interesting and to continue. And after all these years, I must say, of discussions and consultations and all kinds of activities, it's great to see that finally it's moving. So we have a proposal on the table. And we're, of course, very much looking forward to more proposals in that sense. So, yeah, and let's continue this discussion. Thank you.
Well, then I would like to thank all the participants and particularly the Commission to already go into a detailed debate of this proposal one day after it's been released. I think that's very brave and very kind, so thanks a lot for that. And thanks, of course, to the audience and the very interesting questions. And I guess we will be seeing more of each other over the next few years when we will be seeing more proposals to follow the one that has come out this week. So thank you very much.